3 chapters ago, we met the first of the 3 friends of Iyov, 3 friends who I guess we met earlier on when they came to visit him, but the opening of Eliphaz. And today we have friend number 2 in chapter 8, Vayan Bildad Hashuchi Vayomar. Bildad Hashuchi now gets up and states. Now, if you remember, we had what happened. Iyov and his kids dying, and he's so wonderful, and pain going to him, and finally he curses the day he was born, and then his first friend Eliphaz tries to tell him, the world is just, and there is a creator, and you must have done something wrong. And Iyov basically says nicely, shut up, what you're talking about. I didn't do anything terribly wrong. I don't deserve this. And he speaks for a couple of chapters, and blames a little bit that God is too close to me and don't pay attention to me. Just so we have it. Now we have friend number 2, and this is Bildad. So apologize if you remember very well, but always good to have a little review. And Bildad says as follows: Adan timalel ele veruach kabir imre picha. How long will you speak such things? Your utterances are a mighty wind. Iyov spoke of himself as a wind, as fleeting, as something that's only there for a second. God, why are you paying attention to me at the end, towards the end of the last chapter? I'm fleeting. I'm nothing. A man's a little bug to be crushed on. What are you paying so much attention to me? Every little thing, every little breath, every little swallow of my spittle that I'm being punished in such ways. Just leave me alone. Leave me alone. Pay attention to other things. Why are you paying attention to man? And so here, Bildad, it seems to an extent, is using that idea of a mighty wind, right? You're not just a little wind, you're a mighty wind. Now you're speaking a mighty wind, but that idea, the wind, the fleeting that Iyov spoke about in the last chapter. And he continues, Ha'el yavet mishpat v'im shaddai yavet tzedek. Will God pervert the right? Will the Almighty pervert justice? Are you saying God didn't do things right? Im banecha chatulo. If your son sinned against him, he dispatched them for their transgression. So here, what Bildad is referring to specifically is back in the first chapter. It talked about Iyov and his great wealth and his great family and 7 sons and 3 daughters, and they would get together, showing family harmony rather than family disharmony. But Iyov, after they would get together and have these meals, Iyov would go and would offer sacrifices and say, maybe my sons did something wrong. Maybe they did not act properly. And so Iyov, to an extent in that first chapter, acknowledges that maybe his sons were doing something wrong. He doesn't, I shouldn't say acknowledges, we're told biographical information about him as saying as such, and maybe his friends knew about it. Certainly as the readers, we knew about it, but it's not clear that they did anything wrong. He said they might have done something wrong. They might have gotten a little drunk. They might have said something wrong. They might have. So here, what Bildad is saying is they died. They must have done something wrong, right? That's just the way it is. That's our religious belief. It's tzaddik is not viralo. It's rasha viralo. It's the wicked get punished. Continuing verse 5, but if you seek God and you offer supplication to the Almighty, if you are blameless, if you are upright, He will protect you and grant well-being to your righteous home. Right, Iyov, obviously, the walls caved in. Your 10 children, grandchildren, all died. It must have been that they did something wrong. They were not blameless. Now we know. We can't speak for Iyov's children, whether they were blameless or not. It's quite clear that we know that they didn't deserve the death that occurred to them, because it's not based upon reward and justice. It's not based upon judgment. It was based upon God's sort of challenge and contest with Satan in this book. Completely, it has nothing to do with judgment and justice. It has nothing to do with any of that. But his friend is, this is the usual sort of religious arguments. You did something wrong, that's why you were punished. This is the way that we understand things. This is the way that things are. And that has to be the way it is. Your life has to fit into our preconceived religious notions and notions of God and notions of the way that God runs the world. Let's continue in verse 7. Excuse me. But if If you listen to God, if you are tamim, if you are a good person, then what's going to happen? God's going to, right? Your home's going to be righteous. And in verse 7, your beginnings might be small, but in the end, you will grow very great. Ask the generations past, study what their fathers have searched out for. So up to this point, really, up to verse 7, he's basically saying to him, if you did things right, things would be okay. And if you continue and you consult and you turn back to God, then things will get better for you, which is very hard to say to somebody who's really suffering and struggling. Things will get better for you. It's probably true, especially if somebody hits a real low. Probably things will bounce. They might not bounce back. Iyov might not have the same life that he had, a weeks earlier, but things will bounce back somewhat. But it's a very hard thing to say to people. And now in starting verse 8, he starts sort of a different things. He says, go back into the past. Go ask the early generations. You're not the first person who has attempted to try to understand God and understand the way that God judges the world. Continue in verse 9. And why should you go into the past and ask? Because our days on earth are just a tzel. They're just a shadow. They're limited. Our knowledge is limited. Our comprehension is limited. What we understand and what we know is minute, is small. And so go back into the past. You're only seeing a little piece of everything. Haloheim in verse 10, Yorucha, Yomru lach umilibam yotziu milim. They'll teach you and tell you, speaking out of their understanding. You're not the first person to go through this. Other people have gone through this. Other people have longer than you. Other people no longer, we only have a limited capacity. So go and find what other people have said. Hayigeh gomeh below vitza. Yisga achu v'limayim. Can papyrus thrive without marsh? Can rushes grow without water? Right? There's so many things. The world is complex, and you just have your experience, but you don't understand the full capacity. You're just the papyrus, but the papyrus doesn't happen without the marsh, the rush, right? Can't grow without the water. There's so much more that you don't see. You only see your little bit. And so you think that God is unjust, and you think that God was not right, and you think that you were punished for no reason. No, you're wrong. Odena v'ibolo yiktaf lifnei chol chatzir yivash. While still tender, it's not yet plucked. They would wither before any other grass, right? You don't see it. You don't understand the fullness of the world, the fullness of biology, the fullness of botany in his analogy here. You only see your little piece that you're plucking out without understanding even much of anything. Continuing pasuk Yud Gimel, Kein orchot kol shochachei el v'tikvat chanef toved. Such is the fate of all who forget God. The hope of the impious man comes to nothing. It is lost, right? You think you know God? It's not the case. Asher yakut kislo uveit achavish mivtacho, whose confidence is thread of a gossamer, whose trust is a spider's web, right? It's something that's not there. You have confidence. Your trust is a spider's web. Spider's web. This is not, the Hobbit, the Lord of the Rings, where the spider is 20 feet large, and the web can stick you in the web and you can't get out. Spider web, you just push right through it. You have no trust. Your trust is like a spider's web. It's nothing. It's a little nothing that can just be pushed about. Yishain al beito v'lo yamod yachzik bo v'lo yakum. He leans on his house, it will not stand. He seizes hold of it, but it will not hold, right? Because it's not strong, it's not firm. Your understanding and your faith was only good when things were good, but now things are not so good, and you'll lean on the house and it will fall. Ratov hu lifnei shamesh v'al ganato yin yon kto tetzei. He stays fresh in the sun. He shoots springs up in his garden, right? So, right, it seems like everything is fine, and everything is good, and therefore you are faithful, and everything you think is fine when the shoots are springing up, and the sun is keeping everything fresh. But when that doesn't continue, Al gal shoroshav yisbachu beit avanim yechazeh. His roots are twined around a heap. They take hold of houses and stone, right? So your faith is entwined with your success. Your faith is entwined with your building remaining standing and firm, but it's not always going to remain standing and firm. Lo ri'iticha, when he's uprooted from his place, it denies him, saying, I never saw you. So a little bit of a difficult verse to understand what it's saying, but it seems that the downfall happens and the person doesn't recognize how it came about. Right? It's as if he forgot how it came about. Why did this happen? That I had this home and that all of a sudden I'm uprooted from this place. How did it happen? And that's in a sense what he's saying Iyov did, as if Iyov is saying this came about for no reason. I didn't do anything wrong. My kids didn't do anything wrong. Why am I sitting here on this dung heap? Why do I have boils all over my body? Right? It doesn't make sense. What am I doing here? Hen hu misos darko ume efer ume afar, achar yitzmachu. Such is his happy lot, and from earth others will grow. Right? The wicked man, he thinks that that there's no reason for what happened to happen, and he thinks that everything is just random and it didn't come from God. But God doesn't despise the blameless. God doesn't doesn't give support to evildoers, meaning that it's not random, it's justice. This is the categories. God said X, you do X, things will be good. You do Y, instead of X, things will not be good. So God is not supporting the wicked, which, yeah, right. And God is not in the converse. God is not destroying the righteous. You're not righteous. That's just not the correct. That's just not the understanding. You're wrong. You're speaking winds, your mighty winds, and then they're not going to last. Continue verse 21. He will yet fill your mouth with laughter and your lips with shouts of joy. Right? We know this working off of the verse with a different spelling, right? In we say Birkat Hamazon, right? Yimales chok pinu ulshonenu rina. Very very similar verse to this. That in Tehillim, the person who is hazorim b'dimah, the person who is crying and tears when they are sowing, and eventually they will reap with joy. And what Bildad is saying here is right. You're wrong. You were mistaken. You're blaming God. You're saying things were unjust. That's not the case. That's not the reality. The reality is otherwise. Turn back towards God, and if you do, then your mouth will be full of laughter and your lips shouting with joy. If you remain in the right religious posture, if you remain in the right religious standing, if you remain with faith of God and you understand why this happened to you and the things that you did wrong, and maybe you investigate, then eventually that is what you will be once again. And the last verse 22, Sonecha yilbashu boshet, va'ohel rishaim einenu. Your enemies will be clothed in disgrace. The tent of the wicked will vanish. So I don't know what enemies necessarily Iyov has here specifically. If this is referring specifically to Iyov, maybe it means his enemies are his sins. He's probably thinking right now, my enemy is you, Bildad, and you, Eliphaz, for your assumptions of what I have done wrong. But the tent of the wicked will vanish. But you will not be the tent of the wicked anymore. You will have returned to God. You will be together with God. You will be Yimales chok picha, and you will be in a place where you are once again close together with God, with your house restored and your life being fine. And that's the way Bildad is speaking to Iyov here. And you have to wonder, when you listen to the speeches of Bildad, or you listen to the words of Eliphaz, did they have trouble in their life? Did they have problems? Did they have the vicissitudes? Did did they suffer? Because they don't seem, at first their mouths are closed, and like we said, it's because it's on we learned Mishlei right before this, of course, and Mishlei is so much about keeping your mouth closed and not saying anything, and they what they say is very very harsh to him. And it reminds me of something I learned not recently in a different context, but in terms of Yaakov. Stay on for another minute, unrelated to our chapter, but you'll see by association. Yaakov, right? Binyamin is in Yosef wants Binyamin to come down to Egypt, and Shimon is down there with Yosef, and Yaakov, of course, refuses to let his sons go. And finally, the food is run out from their first trip, and Reuven says, "Oh, let me go, and if I can't get back, if I can't get Binyamin goes with me and he's unable to come back, then you can kill two of my kids to make up for Binyamin and Shimon, or Binyamin and Yosef, and Yaakov doesn't want to agree with that. And then Yehuda comes up, and for numerous reasons, Yaakov, of course, agrees to Yehuda's desire to take Binyamin down. And there are a lot of things in the speech as to why. He refers to my brother and my brother. He refers to Binyamin as his brother, and he takes responsibility. But part of what we have going on there is that for Yaakov, Yehuda understands Yaakov's plight. Yehuda has lost two sons. Yehuda had a son, a son, Onain. They both died. And so Yaakov, who's lost a son, Yosef, and presumes him to be dead, and Yaakov, who is worried that if his second son, Binyamin, goes, he won't come back, and the two of them die. Yehuda is able to, Yaakov and Yehuda have a common language of the sadness of their experience. And Yehuda, I think that's part of the reason Yehuda is able to really convince Yaakov to let him take Binyamin down with him, because I understand the pain and the worry and the suffering and the anxiety you have, Yehuda. Yaakov, and therefore perhaps that's part of the reason that Yaakov lets Yehuda go down. But in this chapter, Bildad or Eliphaz before them, maybe they didn't encounter any of these problems. They're friends, they come and visit, but they didn't speak a similar tongue to what the Iyov is. They haven't experienced what it has, and thus as a result, presumably, they just don't get it, and they're unable to say the things that he needs to hear and will continue to hear tomorrow and the day after that. The very trenchant, the very strong response that Iyov has back to these friends whom he knows are trying but are not speaking the reality. They're not speaking to the truth of the situation.